Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Arunodoi, the Northeast Students and Youth Summit 2015, organized under the aegis of Students Level Advisory Committee for Students and Youth Welfare, Government of Assam. The Northeast region of India has always been culturally very diverse and distinct, with each culture taking pride in its own legacy and its own roots. The region has also given birth to and nurtured many eminent personalities, a lot of whom we shall have the privilege of interacting with today and also tomorrow. However, the problem arises when we step foot outside the region and realize the popular perception of the country. We are here not just restricted to Bihu or any other culture or Shillong. We are not just tribes and forest, but we are something more. And there's a lot of reshaping of opinion that needs to be done and an entire narrative that needs to be changed. With this in mind, we present to you a seminar on 5 ideas for a developed Northeast by 2030. I am pleased to announce that a panelist for our session are Mr. Pradip Phanjoubam, Mr. J.N. Goswami, Mrs. Sanjukta Parashar, Mrs. Rashmi Baruah, Mr. Shankar Nath, and Mr. K. Yhome. I would request Ayan Borkotoki and Saidatan Asneha Mohib to escort our panelists to the stage. Now I'll take the pleasure of introducing all our panelists briefly, and then I'll hand over the stage to our moderator. Mr. Pradip Phanjoubam is a senior journalist of the Northeast. He is an editor based out of Imphal, and he is one of the foremost experts in Manipur politics and ethnicity-driven issues. He is also an authority on ethnic-based issues of the Northeast. We are indeed privileged to have him today. Mr. J.N. Goswami is an Indian scientist from Assam. He was the chief scientist of Chandrayaan-1 and also was developer of the project. He served as a director of physical research laboratory situated at Ahmedabad, Gujarat. He was also associated with Chandrayaan-2 and Mangalyaan. He is also known as the Moon Man of India. Mrs. Sanjukta Parashar is an IPS officer of Assam Meghalaya Cadre. She is currently the SP of National Investigative Agency. She has been an inspiration for all the girls of Northeast together. Mrs. Rashmi Baruah is a faculty teaching in SIS JNU. She did her PhD from Boston University and is also a faculty of Indian Statistical Institute, Delhi. She has published numerous papers and books and has worked in Singapore and Australia. We have Shankar Nath sir, who is an alumnus from IIMC. He is also a senior functionary in one of the most premier unicorn companies of India today. He is currently working as a senior vice president of PayTM. A long stint in corporate sector, he also has a strong academic background. Last but not the least, Mr. K. Yhome. Mr. K. Yhome is a senior fellow with ORF's Neighborhood Regional Studies Initiative. Of late, his research has focused on developments in Myanmar and the evolving geopolitics in the Bay of Bengal. He also worked as an editorial assistant for Indian Foreign Affairs Journal. He has a PhD from JNU and is the author of Myanmar Can the generals resist change. With that, I hand over the stage to our moderator and our sessions begin. Thank you so much.
Well, I just got to know that I'm the moderator for the session. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here, and thanks for being here. Hope everyone had a good lunch, and not everyone is feeling very sleepy. So, my name is Shankar Nath, as the person just announced, and the topic that we have today is what are the 5 ideas that we have for a developed Northeast in the next 10-12 years by 2030. So without further ado, what I will do is I request Sanjukta first in terms of what are your suggestions and ideas for. Well, it's all right. I mean, you can just speak a little and then we move. Okay, fine. Come. That place has a mic. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, respected members of the panel, organizers of today's event, and distinguished guests sitting in front of me. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I was daunted when I saw this topic, 5 ideas for a developed Northeast. Being born in Assam and being brought up there for my schooling years, it was always taught to us. Okay, I studied in the local education board, and I think the recurring theme for our education was always that we in Assam get a stepmotherly treatment. Later on, when I started studying a bit more, I mean, the theme continued, and it was not just Assam, the entire Northeast was looked upon as an area which is not developed because there are issues of communication, and also because the center does not really want us to be developed because there are so many other issues of insurgency, issues of distance, issues of communication, because there are so many different groups of people living there with so much diversity. Perhaps it would have been okay if I kind of stayed in Assam and carried on my life like that. I would have probably believed it. But as it happens, I ended up coming to Delhi to do my graduation, and then I went on to do my master's and MPhil and PhD here. And then further so, it happened that I sat for the UPSC exam. Of course, I sat for it twice. It's not as if I got through at the same time. But I sat for it twice, and the second time I made it through and I joined the Indian Police Service, and I ended up working in Assam. And once I started doing that, because of the nature of the job of the police, that starting from a police station up to the officers, the higher officers in Guwahati, you deal with every kind of people. And once you do that, you realize that perhaps that narrative which was given to you as a child is wrong. Now, how many of us are actually strong enough to want to change our point of view? Usually as human beings, there is this thing called escalation of commitment. We start with an idea, we start thinking about it, and that idea consumes us so much that even if you read a newspaper, you will only follow that track. It's like social media, it's like on Facebook. If you like a particular artist, every time he's kind of putting up something, you'll have to keep following him. You know, something that he says will keep popping up on your feed. So it was something like that. But then how many of us want to stop and say that we will not fall into the trap of escalation of commitment, that we will change the way we think, and let's look at the things that the way they actually are. So perhaps those moments in which I went from one crime scene to the next, from one law and order issue to the next, that my eyes opened up a little bit more, and I gave up that old narrative which was given to me, what I found was perhaps the biggest impediment to our development, the biggest impediment to the change, to improvement in the Northeast was perhaps us. And this, I'm not saying that I want to point a finger to someone else. I want to point that finger to myself. And I wish that everybody else would join me and point a finger to ourselves and say that, yes, it was us who kind of did not help to the region to grow. Every time each one of us have broken a law, every time you have jumped a red light in any crossing in Shillong, in any crossing in Guwahati, you have not made that change which you should have to improve the country. Your own area, okay? And not just these small little things that we have to think about. We have to think about the larger picture also. Funds have gone from the center to the state. It's all available. But have we improved the way the school looks? Have we put our children in those schools? Have we checked that the teachers are coming and they're teaching at the time they should do it? Have we looked at the way when the river, comes in spate, we decide, okay, we'll have to, pump in as many geobags as you want. But have we ensured that actually the real number has gone in through? It's our fault. It's not anybody else's fault. In the morning, the esteemed speaker, Mr. Sangma, the Member of Parliament from Meghalaya, he had mentioned that if the Northeast, the people from the Northeast themselves decide that they are going to be entrepreneurs, it is going to change the Northeast, the picture and the image of the area very easily. And I really believe in that. So my big idea for a developed Northeast in 2030 is that self-improvement for good governance. I believe if we improve ourselves and we aim that we are going to do something good for the region through good governance programs, I think that is all that is required for the country, for our region to go ahead and go forward. We try to ignore it, and especially in the government. Now, being part of the government, I am willing to accept this. So many of us do it every day that, okay, there are about 15 people who are doing it. If I don't do it, someone else will do it. I'm sure even in this organizing committee for this huge program, there were like 30, 40 volunteers. Maybe there is one person who thinks that, okay, somebody else has also been told, so let him do it, I won't. And at the end, what would happen? That person would probably not do the work that he was supposed to do. And what happens? Ultimately, something in this program would not reach the level it was supposed to. So let's all agree that we have to improve our own selves for good governance. I think that is one idea. If we take it to heart, we will be able to change. Of course, if I go into the details here, I think it will be too lengthy. So I'll just end here. The details, I'm sure if anybody is interested, I can always send you my paper. If the summit is publishing anything, they could probably add that. But my idea for 2030 is self-improvement through good governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjukta, for that thought. We'll come back to you later on a particular question that I have, but let's go through the rounds. I would now request Mr. Jitendranath Goswami, sir, eminent scientist, to share his thoughts. He has got a lot of prepared communication also with him.
Good afternoon to everybody. Sometimes I feel that there should be age bar on people who can give advice. And I am above that age bar here. So, but you see, one thing is clear that many of us, we like to give advice. We don't do it with examples. So many a time, anything we tell, it is very difficult to communicate with the younger group nowadays for people like us. Because we grew up in a different style, we work differently, and we are very diffident about telling, very strongly to somebody who is very senior. And because we did that, we are also timid in telling a young person, go to hell, this is not what you should do. But what we can do, because of our own experience of a lifetime, we can think of something, which may be little useful to you. And another thing also I must confess, there were earlier also not conclave, meetings like this in Delhi where, meetings, discussions were taken place. But this is the first time when I got that letter, it said 7 sisters. So that was something new and unique for me, and I really wanted to come and see what is going and how it is going. And when they said, will you tell also something, I said, okay, I will try. And it says 5 things that should change for getting into some, you can call better shape or whatever you can call it. You see, having left Assam, maybe I should say Northeast is long back, from my memory to some extent, because you get busy with other things. And I am not sure if I am competent to talk about, ideas that will, for a developed Northeast. But once I took it as a challenge, okay, let me see what I can say. So another thing, I have some other, you can call cultural or other problem. I do not know what is the definition of developed. It cannot be also a common thing to all people. Like what is developed for the 7 sisters, they may have different definition of developed. Somebody may like that we should, in education, we should go to this level. Somebody will say, no, we wanted to go on here at this level. So there cannot be any unique solution. Yes, there can be partial solution to it, but not unique solution which is applicable for all the 7 sisters. So that is very important. Then, see, but I would like to see what I coined a phrase which is not very good, but I don't know what is better than that. It is called, politicians call it common minimum program. So I think we should have a common minimum program amongst these 7 sisters, which will be followed everywhere, and others will be based on regional requirement and other constraints that may be there. But there will be definitely subjects which could be, I will not call universal, which may felicitate many things happening to these places. Because we talk about job opportunity, this and that. Can we identify some sector where it is, the competition is not that high, but there is scope for doing something more, and that kind of thought, if we can bring in, that will be nice. I also feel very strongly, that was one reason why I don't used to come earlier, that development cannot be top-down. It should be bottom-up. So if we first bring all the huge buildings, and there is nobody there on the shanty side by side, people are sleeping, who is building the buildings, then you feel bad about it. So I think emphasis should be bottom-up process, where we can cover probably, I am sure, 70% of the population. When you go from top down, then of course here you have met some, maybe 50 people, something, very different, they have all the facilities, and they can employ maybe 1,500 people. But that is not, I call, development of the state as a whole. So that is another thing. I think again, there is some catchphrase which I don't have good equivalent. I think it is very important for all the 7 sisters to get together and make their own kind of agenda, and then there should be some commonality, and there is what quote unquote called as a roadmap. I don't know precisely what it means, but I like that word roadmap, and I have to borrow sometime from others' thought process also. See, and this roadmap can only be a starter. If we do not question the roadmap every 6 months, that what is not happening and why, I think it is not useful to have a roadmap like we have in government also, and then after 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, nothing is happening, okay, we will put it in the next plan. See, I mean, some sort of positivity and strength should be there, that what we are trying to do, we must implement at whatever level, but we must implement. And we may not be able to implement everything very thoroughly. And flexibility should be the key of any such roadmap. If you do something and it is not working, it is true for all of us. If something was not working, there is nothing wrong. If I have spent some time, I just bent a little and go in different direction, provided I know that is better than the other one. Who can do that? That is when you need discussion. discussion is needed once a core group of people identify certain things. Then there can be small discussion, broad discussion, wide discussion, everybody can participate and something can be done. I like, as I, even in my science and research, I like realistic target. You see, even though the target I see in the document, it is for about 13 years, am I correct? That we will deliver something in 13 years, about the roadmap, some sort of. I think it may look little, long, but it doesn't matter. And in a lighter vein, you see, I will just tell you a story that in Guwahati University, when I was going to give the MSc exam, you get this entrance, what you call that? You go back to the exam with that, okay? You get a gate pass, that this is your rule number, this is all those things. And after that, I am sitting in the canteen and somebody came. Then he asked, what is your rule number you got? I said, 13. Then he said, oh, no, that's okay, that's okay. Then he said, oh, I just escaped, mine is 12. Because 13 is unlucky. So I am saying that there are some sort of, attitude is there, which should not be there. He is sympathizing with me and he is saying that I am just, got out of it. So it should be some sort of equitable model. And then I think, you see, there should be I said there should be a plan, roadmap. There should be very precise. That roadmap should not be very, kind of loosely. We want to do everything. That is out of question. First thing, define what we'd like to do. Today morning I heard everything. From this to that to train to rail to bridge to everything cannot happen. Each state has to decide what is their most important thing, and on that one should give 80% or 60% of 60 to 80% of the effort. The rest 20 to 40, yes, you need this other thing also. Let's see what more we can do. And I am sure the 7 sisters of Northeast will have individual priority. So it cannot be, goals may be common, but this skill may not be different. So any plan concept should have a, what you can call common minimum program. Every plan, each plan from each state should have something which is there everywhere. But rest, they should be given freedom to do it. And whatever may be the roadmap, I feel, this is now my personal suggestion and opinion, top 2 in the list is health and education. I am not worried if you have to go in a boat somewhere or if you have to go in something, okay, you suffer for a little more. But health in education, these are the main thing. And if you can even train people locally, I don't mind. It is not that we have to import people from outside, but health and education is the prime thing. And then you can go to do the other 4 or 5 things you should select. You should not have, this is always there in whatever, I'm sorry, but whatever you get a political, kind of write-up about what the party will do. You have from A to Z. It cannot be deliverable. It is not deliverable. So one has to be very careful in what each state wants. They should make everything. And I still want that there should be a common minimum program, which is everybody is doing, okay? And I think there will be many commonality even otherwise that also. So I think I didn't talk. See, I can talk about something about the other, 6 sisters, because I was reading about, before coming, I read about 3 states, Mizoram, Arunachal, and Manipur, because I have good friends everywhere. And I can tell you, again, the proposal is to do everything. And this is true even in our 5-year plan also. How many times 5-year plan has reached even 60% of that target? The answer is no. It has never reached. So I think here we are talking about our home, not of the whole country, our state, not of all of us. So I think each state should do something in that manner so that something will happen, and definitely again a common minimum program. I think I feel certain. You see, there should be, you can start with small changes. You should not say, today I am living in a Jhopparpatti, tomorrow I will go to a 2-storied building or something like that. We should not, okay, Jopar-pati, I will come to a little one, then go to a little one and things like that. So I feel that if small changes are made and it is seen by people, then we can say the system is working and it will be possible for bringing everybody together. And let us look now at the brighter side of Northeast with all the 7 sisters. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so some people may not have heard, it doesn't matter, I am a very loud voice person. So I said that I feel we should start with some small changes, but significant change, so that system can bring everybody together, because that will be a commonality, so everybody will agree that this is good. And then let us look for step-by-step process and look for a brighter Northeast with all the 7 sisters in a joyous and happy mood and celebrate that new beginning. We are just starting and we hope it will work out well. And if anything, some of old people like us can advise, we are good in giving advice, we may reluctantly do it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Mr. K. Yhome to come and share a few words with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for having me here. So, when I was thinking what are the 5 ideas that I should share, I thought that, as we learn new things, I think it's also equally important that we learn to unlearn few things. And that's where, some of my ideas I want to share here are, the first I think is that, I think we need to relook at our geography. We all, we have grown up being taught that the Northeast is a periphery, is a frontier region, far away from political and economic centers. Now, if you look at the Northeast today, my understanding is that it's actually at the center of several geopolitical, geo-economic initiative policies that are taking place around us. So I think we need to relook at how we look at the Northeast from a geographical standpoint. So the first point that I think we need to, the idea that should drive or shape our thinking for the next few years is, I think probably we need to think that the periphery is the center today. That's the first one. The second, I think, is we need to learn to take ownership. The first speaker has said, I think, for a very long time, what has happened is, all the policies and initiatives emanating from Delhi has been seen as imposed on the Northeast. There was suspicion about what Delhi was doing there. The consequences of that is that all policies and initiatives, infrastructure projects, nothing has been able to be implemented properly. Now, I think it's important that we take ownership, we own those initiatives so that we can shape them to our advantage. Rather than staying out of it, we can be part of the process and shape it to our advantage. I think that's, again, important, an idea that I think should shape our thinking. The third idea, I think, probably is that we need to develop the habit of working together. It's a good thing that, in the Northeast, the Northeastern people outside, we are very supportive of each other. Once we are back home, once we're in the Northeast, we tend to see through our narrow interests, my state versus your state, my ethnic identity versus your ethnic identity. I think unless we learn to work together, I think we are not going anywhere. So probably, the one idea that we need to learn is that we need to learn, we need to develop the habit of working together among the states in the Northeast and also between Delhi, between the center and the Northeastern states. The fourth idea I think we need to bear in mind is, I think we need to focus more on our strength rather than the weaknesses. So the dominant discourse so far has been, ethnic problems, lack of infrastructure, limited state capacities. If I go out and tell an investor that we have, poor, roads, bad roads, short, power, limited state capacities, I don't think no investor will come and invest in the Northeast. I think this is just part of a few realities of the region. There are several other realities of the region that we are not talking about. I think we need to talk more about our strengths than our weaknesses. I think that also is another thing. In fact, we are actually trapped in a vicious circle, which is that, development is not happening because of instability, and because of instabilities, there is no development. I think we need to break this circle at some point. The other, of course, is, as has also been said, we need to be the change. Unless we are ready to change, and if we are willing to change, I think no force in the world can stop us. Maybe I'll stop here. Thank you.
Now, Rashmi, I would request you to share your thoughts, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first thank everyone in the organizing committee for inviting me and also for doing such a wonderful job in this forum here. I am a teacher. I teach in JNU, so by virtue of that, I'm carrying my lecture notes with me. And the second thing is I'm an economist. And if any of you have ever taken a class in economics, the first thing, the most boring thing maybe that you see on the whiteboard or blackboard is GDP, okay? So unfortunately, I would talk about that too today. I would like to start my conversation by talking about the GDP. So when we look at the GDP, we try to break it into three components, right? So we break it into the three inputs which go into the production process: land, labor, and capital. When I think about the Northeast, land is actually a constraint. Why is it a constraint? Because we have about 52% is forested area, and the rest of the land also, there is very limited arability of land, right? So it's not very arable. So land is a constraint. Capital is also a constraining factor in some sense, at least in agriculture, because whatever land is arable, the land holdings in the Northeast are very small. In the plains and in the hills, we have the problem of irrigation, as a result of which mechanization of agriculture is not really very feasible. So capital is a constraining factor, which leaves us to labor, right? So today's what I want to talk about, the 5 ideas that I'm going to be presenting, would be with respect to labor in the Northeast. Before I go on to talk about those ideas, I just wanted to mention a few things about the demographic profile of the Northeast, which you're all probably aware of, right? The first is that if I look at the age-specific populations, we are very young. Right? So if you, just in Arunachal alone, 40% of the population is below the age of 14. What does this mean, right? So the World Bank describes this as the demographic dividend. It says by 2030, India is going to have a demographic dividend. The whole country as a whole is going to have the largest population in the world of working age people. And in the Northeast, this is even more prominent. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is that if we don't give jobs to this demographic dividend population, in the next 15 years, given the insurgency problem, this might have repercussions, both social and economics, right? So that's the first thing about the demographic profile. The second is that if we look at the sex ratios in the Northeast, they're much better than the rest of India, right? So women have a very good social status relative to the rest of the country. In fact, labor force participation rates also in the Northeast, both amongst men and women, are relatively good, right? Especially amongst women. Which means that any conversation about labor cannot ignore the aspect of female labor force participation. So I'll come back to this point in a while, right? The third thing is that we can't ignore agriculture, even though it is not a very, high productive sector. We can't ignore it because we have, 50 to 70% of the population which is employed in agriculture, and also 30%, up to 30% of the state GDPs actually come from agriculture, okay? So given these points, my focus on labor, basically any development strategy over the next decade, we need to keep these two things in mind. The first is that we need to expand economic activity to engage people of all levels of skill. The second is that skilling itself is important. We need to skill the people, this demographic dividend that we talked about, those youth need to be skilled for the right jobs, okay? So the first idea, given this background, the first idea that I want to talk about is a structural transformation. What do we mean by a structural transformation? So, between 1987 and 2009, if I look at the state level productivity growth, and I divide that into two components. One component is within sector productivity growth, let's say agriculture or industry. The other component is a transformation of labor from a low productive to a high productive sector. When I do that, what I find is that states which were able to reduce poverty by the most amount in this 20 years time were states which had a structural transformation. Structural transformation is that second component where you have labor moving from an unproductive sector to a productive sector. Assam, in fact, in the Northeast had one of the lowest structural transformations in the whole country, which could be a reason why they have not been very successful in alleviating poverty. So what do I mean by structural transformation? How can we actually do this in the long run? One of the ideas is that, you could move economic activity to the, agricultural processing, make horticulture, whether it's fisheries, sericulture, all of that more modern, right? Which is not. And we've also not exploited the fact that, we have this, the Southeast Asia trade route, which we can take advantage of that. And, if we are able to modernize these sectors, we could take advantage of that as well. The second idea for, again, restricting myself to this idea of labor is, we need to develop the tourism industry, because tourism has one of the highest employability possibility, right? And given the flora, fauna, all the festivals that we have, why have we not exploited the fact that we could, have specific festivals and, increase tourism during Bihu festival in Assam, or, during Dashera festival in Manipur, in addition to the festivals that we already have. So tourism, there is a big potential to absorb a high employment in the future to come. The third idea is with respect to women, right? So females employ a better social status relative to the rest of India, and we can't ignore them from the labor force participation, right? So what is it about, what kind of jobs in the future could generate employment for women, right? Besides the traditional handloom and handicraft that we already have. The thing that comes to my mind is nursing, right? So I could look at this as the example of Kerala. There is a big English-speaking population in the Northeast. Northeasterners are employed as in the nursing industry in India, but there is also this demand outside of India. And don't forget that while we are moving to a demographic dividend, the rest of the world, particularly the developed world, is moving to a graying population. So this requirement for nursing is going to increase in the decades to come. And there is a big potential there that we need to exploit. The fourth idea is, what Sanjukta also talked about, is education. Not only am I talking about the quality of education, the quality, though the country has, though these states have relatively high labor force participation rates, but, they're not skilled, right? And one of the reasons is because of the quality of education. So there has to be a focus on, one, the quality of education, and second, vocational training centers. When we talk about tourism, we need the hospitality skilling, right? When we talk about nursing, we need, vocational training with respect to nursing. So that is something that there must be a focus in the years to come. The last thing that I want to talk about, again, with labor in my mind, is health. And in health, I would just want to share a personal experience of, and focus on just one health input, and that's water, right? So there isn't any good water policy for drinking water in Northeast. And it's a big challenge. Just to give you some statistics, 21 out of 27 districts in just Assam alone have arsenic contaminated water. Nobody talks about this. Now, what does arsenic do? Arsenic is an epidemic. In Bangladesh already, there is so much emphasis that has been given on arsenic, in West Bengal as well, but I don't see this coming up in conversations when we talk about Northeast, right? So there has to be this focus on water policy, and in particular, health aspect, the high levels of irons and fluoride, the acidity, as well as arsenic in groundwater in the Northeast. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashmi. Pradip, can you please share your thoughts? Thanks.
First of all, thank you for inviting me here to face this audience and speak something on the idea of development. And I will also, of course, be talking, I'll just concentrate on 2 points. One is this idea about commonness of the Northeast predicament, and the other is about development, what that development is. So many speakers have said this before, but let me just add some perspective to it, hopefully new ones. Stay away from the mic. Closer to the mic. Okay. Yeah. It always makes me a little nervous to face so many young people, because young people normally think the older people are stupid. And I'm not saying this, I'm not just saying this. I got 2 daughters who are also to some extent like that, that they think what we tell them are always outdated and all that. And there are some bases for that, because I know they have skills which we cannot hope to ever garner. For instance, handling the mobile phone, two-thumb typing and all that. Those kind of. So they think, I'm not saying this is general kind of rule, but then there's also an attitude of a bit of, that the older generation are not, are not the right people to really give them advice on the ways of life. But let me just add to this that the people like us who've seen a lot more have also seen a lot more failures and a lot more, a bit of successes as well. And I'm stressing on the word failures because this failure is important. That failure actually, if you've lived through it, then it gives you resilience. And I'm also trying to build on this idea because, there's a book by an American professor called Jeremy Rifkin, where he's talking about the idea of empathy. And he says, empathy is actually born out of a sense of tragedy. That if you didn't have this sense of tragedy of life, empathy would not have been there. That there is no empathy in heaven. If you were to be in heaven, and if there was no death there, if there was no suffering there, no illnesses, then this idea of empathy would have been gone. It would not have been existent at all. And this empathy, he says, is the basis of civilization. That without empathy, you just cannot communicate with another. You just cannot connect with another. And let me just explain this a little more, because before explaining it, let me just stress on the point that this has a neurological basis. As for instance, if I see somebody eating a very sour fruit in front of me, a very sour, amla or something, my mouth begins to water. Although I'm not eating, my mouth begins to water. Or if I see somebody getting beaten up badly or a bad accident, I feel that uneasiness of that injury that other man suffers. So this idea of empathy is actually, according to Jeremy Rifkin, is a soft wiring. It's not a hard wiring. I am not experiencing what the other person is experiencing directly. But by just watching him, I can feel what that other person is feeling. And this is different from the idea of compassion. In the idea of compassion, you feel a little superior, that you see somebody suffer and you want to help, that you are still separate, that distance between the subject and yourself is still very much there. But in the idea of empathy, you begin to feel what the other person is feeling. And this is what the connection is all about. And it says that this empathy is actually what makes it possible for us to actually communicate with each other, and also that sense of commonness that we are talking about. If you're exposed to a certain circumstance, that circumstance is actually going to make you feel one with the other. When somebody else says, I'm having a headache, I know what that headache is all about. I know what he's going through because I have also had that same experience. And I know it's a common kind of a predicament. That, a child, say, by the age of 2, it is said he can recognize himself in the mirror. That is similar to the others, yet different. That kind of identity formation has already begun to happen when a child is 2. By the time he's 8, or she is 8, they get to learn the meaning of death. That the ultimate thing is death. He or she is going to lose her parents, everybody that she has ever loved, and including herself, that she's going to die one day. And that sense of tragedy of death is what is the basis of this empathy. That as I said in the beginning, that if you were to be in paradise, they would have no empathy. So in a way, it's a tragedy which is actually giving us this profound feeling, profound sense of being connected with one another. And I think what is important for us to do is to actually build on this empathy. And let me just add here what another fellow has said, another scholar, a professor actually. He was the Rajni Kothari chair in the CSDS once. His name is Douglas Loomis. He was talking about his empathy, that if you were to be joining the army today as a soldier, the first thing that you're going to be taught is to kill that empathy in you, that you can't feel sorry for the person you're going to hurt. You can't feel sorry for the person you're going to kill. You're supposed to do that without this feeling of empathy. And in a sublimated sense, I think this is also true in sports. You're supposed to be, especially in contact sports, if supposing you're a boxer, you can't be boxing and then, sorry, I hit you too hard. You can't be saying that. You just have to be wanting to kill that other fellow, knock him out. If it is a war, you're supposed to be wanting to kill your enemy. You have to first, so this thing is not easy, he says. Professor Loomis says, it's not easy to kill empathy. You do that in soldiers. But then what happens is if you've seen a terrible war, they come back and then they suffer from this PSDS, post-traumatic stress syndrome. That kind of thing is happening because you're trying to kill something which is basic in you. And he says there's one experiment that he talked about which is quite interesting. He said after the First World War, there was a survey done amongst the American soldiers who participated in the war, and they were asked how many of them actually lift up because they were using the old rifles, 303 and that kind of rifle, where you had to lift the rifle to your eye level, aim at the soldier, another guy, and then shoot. He says this thing is not easy. And in the survey, it is found that not all, a good majority of the people didn't actually do that kind of firing. They actually fired in the direction of the enemy, but they never lifted their weapons up, aimed at somebody and killed. That thing is very difficult. So what they did was, they redesigned their weapons. So after the First World War, they came up with these hip-firing weapons like AK-47, M16 and all that. You can lift and shoot, but you can also fire from the waist. And this was actually because this empathy thing was coming in between your killing ability and the weapon. So they changed the weapon so that you didn't have to be going through that trauma of actually aiming at somebody and killing. And after that, after the Second World War, the statistic actually changed very much. There were so many other people who have actually fired at the enemy, and the effectiveness of that war weapon actually grew because of this. So he was actually saying this empathy is very important. But let me not digress too much into this. what I'm essentially saying is that there are certain things in us, inbuilt in us, which is connecting us all. And this is especially true with people who share the same predicament. That, for instance, we've been told that the Northeast is backward, which is true, quite true. That we have been clubbed together as a certain kind of geographical entity, geographical and peoplehood entity. You know, that we've always fallen in the blind spot of the national outlook, and this actually should be binding us together in another way. And I think that is also happening in some ways, that the Northeast identity is evolving because of that commonness of predicament. And I think this is important, that we, that empathy of fellow being, that empathy of a fellow sufferer in a similar predicament is actually growing. And I think we should be building on that. And let me, before I come to my second point, that on the issue of development, what kind of development should we be pursuing? Let me just again stress on the point of us actually trying to identify that commonness on the basis of this what is understood as empathy. And on the idea of development, let me just also quote so many other people and what we have also seen in front of us, that in the Northeast, all the programs of so-called development initiatives have been reactive. It's never been so much proactive. And that proactivity, I think, probably will come from with the next generation. So far has been so reactive. In a sense, that it is often said, Nari Rosanji himself has said it, that if there was no World War II, when the Japanese actually came into the Northeast, so many of the roads that we have now would not have been there. If there was no 1962 war, so many airports that we have in the Northeast would not have been there. These were developed because of that reaction to a certain external circumstance. We are not anticipating any need for those infrastructure as they were. So what we need to do now is to be able to think beyond just reacting to external circumstances, but also think beyond and see what will come to be handy in the long run. And to come to the last point that I started off with, the idea of development, when I am actually trying to say that there are certain things which are very, very tangible. We've been talking about those tangible issues. For instance, we've been talking about roads, we've been talking about connectivity, but there are also so many intangible aspects of development which actually binds us together. And let me again cite a book. Amartya Sen has written a book, Development as Freedom, where he was also talking about these kind of things, that intangible factors of development. There's a particular comparison that he makes between the middle class in an underdeveloped country like India and the poor in a developed country like America. And he was trying to compare them in terms of income, in terms of actual income. The poor in America are generally better off than the low middle class in a place like India. And he was taking the example of Kerala, because Kerala is a more egalitarian kind of society, apparently. So he was taking the case of Kerala. And there what he found was quite educative, in a sense that he found, okay, if you may have more income, but in terms of the indices of unhappiness, he calls it. He doesn't say happiness, but it's unhappiness of these people, these groups of people. He found that the poor in the black Americans, he takes the example of black Americans, is much more. Indices of unhappiness such as juvenile delinquency, petty crime, prostitution, that kind of thing is much more amongst the black Americans, although in terms of absolute income they are more than the middle class here. So there are other factors which are actually making a people more cohesive, or the integrity much more intact, and also the idea of happiness and unhappiness being augmented by these factors. So I think we should also be concentrating on identifying what are those unfreedoms that we are facing and eliminating them. Once we are able to see it in this way, I think it will be much simpler for us to know where to hit. For instance, I think one of the most important things in this approach to development is the idea of building community. We're not thinking in terms of GDP or anything. You just build community. And I think that's this initiative is important. Initiatives like this are important because it is also part of such a project. You're building community, you're identifying those commonness, and I think ultimately the idea of dignity, idea of peoplehood is going to come from this kind of addresses you make to the intangible factors that hold an entire population together, that actually give the idea of development new meanings. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. Just wanted to ask, most of you are students here, is that right? About 80% of the people would be students here, and you are bright students, I guess, because you are from the Northeast and you are studying in Delhi. I just have one question, which is, how many of you would think that after completing your studies, you'll be able to go back to your respective mother states and find a job of your liking? Well, maybe about 5 to 10% of you are saying that. The others perhaps are thinking that since I've come out from home, I've come to Delhi, I'm studying here, this is where I will even work and secure my living later on in life. And that, I think, is true for most of us. A generation ago, we have gone through that. And therein lies a significantly big problem, which I feel today, is that of employment. I know the government is doing its complete bit in terms of providing jobs in the government sector, but that alone is perhaps not enough to absorb everyone, which is why you find a lot of disguised employment, underemployment, and people essentially moving out to other parts of the country. Now, that is a little sad because I see across my friends and our generation that some of them have actually, after doing well in Delhi or Bombay or wherever in the metros, they have been able to go back to their respective states and start working or start industry or start an enterprise of their own. I think one significant thing which we need for the youth to be less restless and to have some sort of security is private investment. And that is significantly lacking in the Northeast. I can speak about my state, Assam, and I'm sure across the entire Northeast. I mean, today, frankly, because of certain locational disadvantages, maybe we have a disadvantage as far as manufacturing is concerned. But in the services sector, where soft skills are required, there's no way that any boy or girl from the Northeast is inferior to anyone else in the country. The problem is that the unemployment doesn't exist. And for that, I think the state necessarily needs to encourage private investment. And not only private investment, the necessary infrastructure and the ecosystem for that private investment to be sustainable. Because charity doesn't work in the long term. If any private enterprise, let's say an Infosys or a Wipro, wants to set up a very big setup in Guwahati, for that matter, or somewhere outskirts of Guwahati, where 2,000 people can be employed, those 2,000 people cannot come out of nowhere. It has to be skilled talent for which there needs to be a base for education also, right? And other necessary setup like power consumption and data and connectivity. But the fact is that if you employ 2,000 people in a private sector job, chances are that that will support 6,000 to 7,000 people in the entire ecosystem. Rashmi will be able to tell better in terms of the linkages with employment, but my reasonable estimate is 2,000 people can secure the lives of 10,000 through being a part of the family or through the different support systems. So private investment is necessary, and the state necessarily has to provide the adequate infrastructure for capitalist organizations to come and set up a profitable enterprise. The second thing which I thought is necessary is a change in perception. Now, most of us who come from the Northeast know that it's a very beautiful land, but it's not. While it's very beautiful, there are equally beautiful places in rest of India. We cannot keep on saying that our land is very pretty. People should come and visit our Assam or Arunachal Pradesh or any other place. The fact is that if there are no good hotels, if there are no good airports, right, why would anyone come to the Northeast versus going to Kerala. The other point in that perception problem is also, though we have a few of our esteemed colleagues here who work in the state administration, and Assam today and Northeast today is not as disturbed as it was much earlier, still the perception definitely exists in the rest of the country that if I am going to the Northeast for a vacation, I am perhaps endangering myself and my family in a little way. That's point number one. The second point is I'm not really very sure whether the infrastructure exists. Now these two combined problems lead to someone essentially choosing some other destination versus the tourist destination of the Northeast. And that tourism not succeeding has a significant problem in removing the perception that the Northeast is essentially a very, very underdeveloped area. It's essentially inhabited by people who do strange things. I mean, our daughter is in class 4, and she today is studying the political map of India. And she has to name all the states and their capitals, right? So when she was going through, and I was just sitting with her the other day, in the part where the Northeast exists, her teacher said, it's all right, students, as long as you know that this part is Northeast, you don't need to know about the 7 or the 8 states, including Sikkim. And therein lies a manifestation of the problem that we have, which is that of perception, that perhaps this entire block is not important enough. And for that perception to change, I think changing tourism becomes a very, very important factor. Changing the perception of connectivity and safety in the state. The other part, I think, on again related to economics is that because of the geographical location of it, we are cut off from the rest of the country, but we have a lot of access to Southeast Asia. And I know there are certain developments that are happening with the Japanese Prime Minister also coming in recently and talking about connectivity to Burma and Vietnam and then to Thailand. And we keep hearing about it. I mean, these talks have been, I've heard them since we were students. But hopefully something will come to fruit now, because I think economics is the fuel on which everything runs. If there is good economics, everything else falls into place. I mean, we have seen that recently. If there was not a lot of trade between China and India in terms of Chinese investments in India, the ground situation in Doklam and the resolution could have been very, very different. I really think economics plays a very important role, and till the time Assam and the Northeast is an important part contributing to the GDP of the country through strategic trade with South and Southeast Asia, I think we will still always be considered a poor inferior cousin. Now, basically, I don't have too many more points to share, but I think at the end of it, you youngsters who are here, and most of you would be first year, second year students, I don't think we can sit back and say that, oh, the perception exists, we are victims of it, we'll live through it. It's up to you, like one gentleman said right at the beginning. The most important thing here is that you need to have the confidence in yourself, you need to be the enabler of the change yourself. And every person who has come out, if he or she can influence about 50 people in India about their perception in a positive way about the Northeast, I think we'll be good. That's all that I had to share. I would now like to go back to a few members of the panel and ask them if they would they would like to share some additional thoughts, and especially to Sanjukta, who mentioned right at the beginning, in terms of, I mean, one obviously reason why we might have fallen a little behind others since 1991 has been the perception of being a very disturbed region. Now that's changed. And on the other hand, Rashmi, you talked about tourism being a very important sector. And there's an interplay here between law and order situation and tourism. Now, what is it that we do, given that the ground realities today are slightly different? Is there anything that you think that can be done to promote more tourism and linkages with the rest of the country?
Like what you wanted me to answer was, is there a way to link tourism with?
The bigger point was in terms of that the law and order and the political situation today is perhaps significantly better than what it was in the 90s, early 90s and all of that. But given the media coverage or whatever, the perception still exists in a lot of people that it's a very disturbed land. And the moment that, till the time that perception exists, movement to the northeast of people from the rest of the country is always going to be less, and thus is an impediment to tourism, clearly, right? Do you think the administration or the state needs to do something to change this particular perception?
Thank you. In this question, I think I'd like to tackle it at like 2 or 3 different levels. The first one would be policy. Fine, so we want tourists to come to our area, whether it is Assam or to Manipur or to Nagaland or to Meghalaya. And a lot of people do come, especially now that, for example, just one state, Meghalaya, has now developed their adventure sports in such a way that a large number of people actually want to go there. They want to do rock climbing, they want to do zip lining, they want to do kayaking. Can you believe it? In Meghalaya, there is a whole lot of people who come to do kayaking. Caving is another huge adventure sport there. And they have developed it. But at the policy level, let's look at the facts, okay? Number of flights to the northeast. Is it easy for you to fly there?
Definitely not.
I mean, it's not easy for us to fly out. So imagine how difficult it is for you to fly in there. And not just like main Assam. From there, suppose you want to go to Menchuka. Beautiful place, amazingly beautiful place. People like me go there because we're in the police, so somewhere along for your work or something, you have to go there. We sent a huge team to Anini to get some people back, and the guys who went there, the photographs they showed me, I mean, it's something out of this world. You can't even imagine how beautiful it is. But it's not accessible. To go to Menchuka, you would need a flight to Guwahati, a train ride to Itanagar, then from there maybe about 8-9 bumpy hours on a road all the way to Menchuka, and then you camp there for 2 days and you come back. But then what do we need when we want to do some tourism? Like if I want to go to Goa, I'll take one flight from here to Goa, spend 5 days there and come back. Whereas for the Northeast, you'll need to have someone who will travel for 5 days just to spend 2. So at a policy level, I think this change has to be there. Secondly, at the other level of perception, which you are saying, I think a lot of people have already begun to realize that the Northeast is not as disturbed as you wish or you imagine it to be because of all that is there in the media. And I think in that, I'm sure the youngsters who have their social media accounts and people, the journalists would have a huge role to play in changing the narrative here.
Thank you, thank you. I just wanted to know at this point, are there any students here who would like to ask some questions to the esteemed panel? Anything about, yes, please. Can we get a mic across to him? Can we get a mic across to him, please?
Namaskar. I want to ask one question. Is there any potentiality to develop industries in northeast regions apart from small sector industries? Because already some handicraft industries and small sector industries are already developed in northeastern region, but there is no heavy industries are developed in that region because of transportation drawbacks and these. But I want to know that is there any potentiality or any possibility to develop heavy industries in that region?
In the time frame that we are talking about, I think the focus needs to be on industries where not that much capital is required, right? So, if you're talking about development in 2030, what comes to my mind is actually small-scale industries, and in particular, agricultural processing industries. Another example that comes to my mind is, and I always find it surprising that we haven't actually exploited the herbs that we have. And there is this herbal, alternate medicine industry which is flourishing in India. Organic farming is flourishing in India. So, industries related to that. But heavy industries, heavy manufacturing industries, because of the limitations on land use, in the short run, I don't see, and also because, the lack of infrastructure as well as, loans and financial development, in the short run, it doesn't come across as a very feasible option.
One more question, please. Ma'am, then are you talking about food processing industries? Food processing industries in near future?
Yeah, so we could think about, given the horticulture is such a big part of the, agricultural activities there, we could have food processing industries, let's say dried flowers, dried fruits, so that's definitely a possibility because it does not require a lot of, it doesn't require a lot of investment. And, if you look at Uttarakhand, that's what they're doing now, right? So Uttarakhand, hilly terrains, but they are really, and everything that you buy now when it comes to organic products, herbs, dried fruits, dried vegetables, you would see that a lot of it is coming from this Uttarakhand belt because of the connectivity, whereas in the northeast, we haven't exploited that yet. So yes, I mean, food processing is a possibility.
We'll have to give someone else a chance also. Yeah. Next question.
So my question is, considering that Assam and Northeast is like the region's more educated, it has a higher educated population than most other states in the country, why do you think it is that most of our, say, students who have the economic means to go outside, choose to go outside for, say, higher education or to find job opportunities and then decide to stay out and not necessarily come back to the region?
Actually, I don't agree with that because, we might have, when you define it literacy as, some years of schooling, we might have that. But the quality of education is actually one of the poorest, if you, not just quality or also the fact that, you have to walk 5 kilometers to reach the nearest school and you go there and, you have teacher absenteeism. We don't have any accountability in the education sector in the Northeast. There is mushrooming of institutions, but there is no accountability of the quality. And that's the reason that the employability is so low, right? Because, you might be giving, you might have high numbers when it comes to literacies, but the quality of education doesn't make those skills employable.
Okay, thank you. Pradip wanted to answer a part of the previous gentleman's question.
Yeah, that, and also I can combine it with this a little. You were talking about educated people young people from the Northeast going outside and finding work there. The fact is, they can't find work there, that's why they're going away. So I think the important thing for policymakers is to make those work there as well. As for instance, and what kind of work? And here I would like to suggest that apart from the agro industries and all that, we can also have this value addition kind of industries where, you'll find so many of your Nike shoes made in Cambodia and Vietnam, where actually is not the place of origin. Like that, and if you have assembly plants where you're doing only value addition, you have, say, for instance, bicycle assembly plant, which will be exported to Burma and Thailand, made in Guwahati or Imphal or Kohima, then I think that kind of thing can work. And the exodus of educated people from the Northeast, the skilled people from the Northeast who are capable of doing job, but they don't have job there, that's why they're going away. So if you have those jobs there in the Northeast itself, I think they will remain. And not only that, they will also add to the economy of the place as a whole.
Okay, thank you. One last question before we come to a close. Yes, please. Okay, fine, go ahead.
Sir, as scientists are predicting that as global warming is on the rise and temperature increasing day by day, scientists are predicting that there will be more intense hurricanes and there will be more intense rainfall and will be increasing numbers in the coming years. And we already know that in the Northeast, there is a good amount of rainfall. And in the future, when there will be more rainfall and storms will be more intense, that we know that due to flooding, there will be a cut-off in the roads, in the markets. So, sir, there is any development to face the problem in the future for the Northeast, so that people come for the employment basis and secure of living there.
we'll request our eminent scientist on this panel to answer this question, which was more about weather changes and global its impact on agriculture and jobs. And in the first place, do you agree that that's a threat?
I'm not very conversant with all the stuff regarding the question. But you see, the question of global warming and climate change, it is a very hot topic, and it is sometimes even difficult to say who is exactly right. Okay, many a time, many of the proposals or whatever you call that submission, they are not exact up to the level one would like to have. But one thing is for sure, that there is some change in global climate. There is no doubt about it. But the rate at which it is happening and how much it will affect, suppose in Indian peninsula or whatever you want to call it, I think that part is still not very clear. Because, see, it is a non-linear kind of, situation there, and most of your equations and things doesn't work. Sometimes you have to put in additional parameters to see what may be the different outputs. And different outputs can be predicted, but which will really happen cannot be predicted very much in advance. And but we always know, nowadays we can tell very clearly, I think by end of this year, people can tell us what will be the situation during the next year. So that kind of things, but long term, I doubt we still have the capability to tell that over 10-year time scale, this is the kind of evolution of the climate will be. But one thing is for sure, that we are killing the climate by our own stupidity.
Thank you very much. And with that, we come to a close on this. Thank you so much for being here and listening to us. Thanks.
All the respected guests and all the participants. Just after this, we'll have the next panel discussion. After that panel discussion, we'll have a talk by a famous singer, Joy Baruah sir. And in the evening, we'll have, as a part of the cultural show, we'll have the famous singer, Neel Akash. Ma'am. Now I'd like to request our respected MP, Kamakha Tasa sir, to please felicitate our panelists. I request the volunteers to assist.